commander, Dan Blexley, as we crossed the French coast, he said, guys, I gotta go back. My engine is acting funny. So anyway, I was coming up over the Havre, and that thing just went on me. Bang. After I had experienced, backfiring and this, and it appeared that at that time, out of the 12 cylinders, maybe 6 cylinders were operating, or 4, or 5, or 6. But it was coughing and moaning and yawning. So just as I was coming over the Havre, the goddamn flak, was the heaviest I had ever seen. My engine quit, I gave Mayday, and then after my third or fourth Mayday, my radio quit. I crash landed. I decided not to really try to make to the English Channel, because if I had bailed out, the wind, we had north wind at that time, by the way, the wind would have brought me over the Havre, and the guys would have practiced on me. And it was the period where the Germans were shooting anybody coming down in a parachute. B-17 boys, you should have seen it, coming down in a parachute, and the goddamn Luftwaffe guys, just strafing the hell out of them. Anyway, that in mind, I was kind of scared and so on, so I decided to go southbound. Now, the crash landing is a little complicated. I describe it in the book very, very nicely. And I'm not going to go through here because I don't want to take the time. Anyway, I crash landed there, and I was standing on the wing when I crash landed, because what I had attempted to do was to bail out at 2,000 feet, not high altitude. Now I had an aircraft without an engine, remember? I trimmed the aircraft nicely, I blew up the canopy, I got up and I tried to stop on the wing, but my dinky cord, the dinky cord that you connect to the main west, I have forgotten to connect that when we left. We were in a hurry. One of the great mistakes a firepower can make. So when we were tumbling over Bordeaux, evidently that thing, the plug got stuck somewhere below my seat there in something like this, So as I stood up, I said, the plug. I tried to pull the plug, nothing coming up. I tried to pull it. In the meantime, the perspiration and the fear was all over me. Sit down. I sat down back there, and I played left or right, and finally I disconnected the goddamn thing from wherever it was trapped. I connected it to my main west. Too late now. I wasn't going to be over the channel. But anyway, I connected to the main west. I got up again, and the wind was blowing me back. I stepped out on the right-hand side, and what I had in mind, I had never done that before, put the right hand by the D-ring and count up to 10, and pull the thing and wait for whatever is going to happen. Thank God that I looked up there and I can see cattle, cows all over the goddamn countryside, farmland where I was coming down. Had I really left the aircraft, the parachute would have never opened, or it would have opened exactly the moment I stopped the ground. So I stood right there, I thought of trying to get back in the cockpit, and with my parachute on, I thought I would destroy the stick there, So the aircraft was coming just straight down, and we just missed the roof of the only barn in that farmland area. And as I passed the farm, in fact, I reached inside and I pulled the stick back a little bit to miss that roof there. But by doing that, I probably killed whatever speed I had, because on the other side of the barn, the right wing came down, struck the ground, and I was thrown between the stack propeller in the air and landed somewhere there. How long I stood there, I have no idea. Two German soldiers came in later on while I was preparing to put fire on the aircraft. They fired at me and they scared me. I dropped everything and I began to run into the forest. I got into the forest, and that's where I lost it. For 5 days, I wandered all over the countryside. I drank water from running creeks. I ate grass, and thank God I was grown up in dandelions. My mother used to make dandelion salads, and I found those goddamn wild dandelions. I picked them up, put them in my pocket, and I washed them, as I was going through the running creeks. The underground picked me up 5 days later. I had a problem with that now. This guy, a lieutenant colonel of the French Secret Service, but underground man, Stefan, you parle anglais, not like American. He said, well, so I told him, I said, I was not born in America. I said, I was born in Athens, and I went to America when I was 18. So he wanted to know more than about rank, serial number, and date of birth, and so on. He asked for my father's name, and this and that and that. That's how they were really operated. Why? Because before the war, German families with youngsters went to Germany to visit the grandparents. What do you think Hitler did when or the Gestapo when the war started? You think they left those American boys to come home? They used them. In fact, they had a captured B-17, I was told by the underground, flying, and the guys jumping out with American uniforms, dog tags, impersonating to be American crews, so they can penetrate the underground. Who on earth is helping 10 people from a crashed B-17? We cannot find the bodies, and we cannot find them. Where are they? Where are they going? Who is helping them? This is what they were using. Anyway, so I gave all this information to this guy, about my father's name was Nicholas, my roommate's name was Gentili, the aircraft that I crashed with, Markins QPD, and about a couple of days later, he came into the room with a goddamn bottle of Bordeaux wine. Stefan, we talked to London here at soir yesterday evening. Talked to London. We know who you are, the Flying Greek. In squadron, they always call me the Greek. They never really use my call sign. Greek, what's this? Greek, what's that? Greek, let's go get these guys. Anyway, so I was one in the family. I spent 6 months in occupied France. About 10 days or so later, they moved me to Paris. You know how they moved me to Paris? In a truck loaded with firewood. The driver and another guy here, a gendarme in civilian clothes, and I was in the middle. I could give him fake papers. Jean-Claude Boyer was my name, a mechanician, a mechanic. That during the war, I was with the heavy artillery, and I had lost my hearing. So if anybody asked something, I'd say, what? What you say? What? Qu'est-ce que c'est? Things like that. Anyway, I didn't know it. But while we were driving on the highway to Paris, my friend, the gendarme who spoke some English, he said, Stefan, là-bas, beaucoup mitraillettes, machine guns, underneath the goddamn firewood. If you remember, the RAF, later on we were going to do the same thing, made airdrops in the underground, at different places at night, to the OSS guys, to different people. Now, how do you take those weapons to the underground in Paris? You can't just walk with them. That was one of the methods. So when he told me that underneath that firewood was mitraillette, I wanted to say, stop the car, I'm moving out. Anyway, I lived with 16 different families in Paris. The last family, there were 3 guys. The biggest saboteurs the underground had, and I don't know if you gentlemen remember, but General Eisenhower said in his book, if it wasn't for the French underground, the invasion in Normandy could have had a different face. They were good, saboteurs. I took part with them. The first exhibition I had with them was an airdrop. We went at night, and I was holding one of the flashlights. They make a triangle. Way up there, one guy with the flashlight with the funnel, so the light will go up, not that way. And they get him to hold this flashlight, when they give the signal, I turn the light on for this, not like Halifax, one of the RAF bombers came in at night and dropped weapons, radios, medicine, what have you. That was my first experience with this group here. Then we went out to derail a train. A train, this is just before Paris was liberated, about the 20th of August 1944. Paris was liberated the 26th, 27th. What the Germans were doing, they took all the prisoners from this furnace, prison southwest of Paris, including a big number of Jewish people, taking them to Germany. So the underground evidently found out through their intelligence, the train was departed such and such time, was going to Nancy, northeast of Paris, and then into Germany. That's where we met another group, and my God, we took the rails. We took about half a dozen rails. We didn't live in there. Another group, was making ditches down there where we buried the rails. But won't you know it? the French engineer, evidently locomotive engineer, he must have been clever. The moonlight evidently signed the tracks, as you can see, when the moon is at the... And then he discovered that there were rails missing. And he stopped the train just before it came out to derailment. What did they do? They went behind the train, removed tracks, brought up in the front, installed them there, and they began to move. We were watching them from the hill, way up there. But by the time they got to Nancy, another group blew up the locomotive, and you should have seen the people escaping, and of course the Germans, with the machine guns, probably killed a good number of them. Anyway, the other episode I'd tangled up with my group here, they got information that the Germans were going to use military trucks, about 7 or 8 of them, to transport stolen property that they were taking from hotels, houses they were renting to Germany. And they were going to depart at such and such night. So our group got the information, we joined up another group northeast of Paris, and we waited around the bend. They gave me an automatic British Brent automatic. And I have also 38 in my pocket. They told me, if you see anybody, bang, when the signal is given. Now, how do you stop a convoy? At night especially. Because the Germans preferred to drive at night, not at daytime. They had prepared spikes. Visualize a small pyramid with a platform, sharp. You put your finger up here, and if you were not careful, you were liable to cut it. That's how sharp. So they put round the bend, not on a straight road, around the bend, every maybe 2 feet or 1.5 or so, cross the road here. So as the truck comes in at high speed, one of the wheels is bound to hit one of those. That's exactly what happened. The first truck, hit the goddamn thing. The driver lost control. He went to the right there. The second truck collided in a small explosion, and you should have seen the other guys coming out. I must have really put down 6 Germans that night. I saw the bodies up there, and I filed that goddamn thing. And then we had to wait until it was a mess. We killed every one of that convoy there. The trucks were burning, and then, of course, we had to get back and hide in a farmhouse, in the barn of a farmhouse, far away from the area there. Anyway, when Paris was liberated, I was there. When Eisenhower evidently worked out to allow General Leclerc, the French general, to walk into Paris with his people, so the French people would say, "Hey, I liberated." But it was Uncle Sam, Ike, and his people, and we, and so on. Anyway, I was lifted back to England, and I was told the bad news: goodbye. You cannot fly in combat anymore. You're going back home. So I was assigned to right field. I had a good assignment there. I went to test pilot school. I began to fly airplanes. I was after finishing test pilot school, I was selected with my buddy Jantelli, who was there also, and we did the service test of the YP-80 at Murat. Tony Lavier checked us out on that aircraft there. But at right field, I had a chance to fly the ME-109, the FW-190, the ME-262, and the Zero. Then I had an experience. I'm not going to go through it. At P-63, I was testing with water injection at 35,000 feet over Cincinnati. Blew up on me. It just blew up. And immediately I released both doors and declared an emergency, and I had to really do something, even jump. But in test pilot school, they stop and say, now, when you're testing something and you run into a problem, see if you can bring it up so we can find out. Right, Bat?
Oh, yes.
So anyway, I landed the goddamn thing dead stick. I want to cut here. I landed dead stick, but I was really coming in too fast. I didn't want to be short. I'd rather be close to the runway and to head with the distance. So I landed about halfway down the west runway at right field. I locked the goddamn brakes, and I remember the tower called me, "Aircraft on the runway, both wheels are on fire." The fire truck, the ambulance, and probably the priest, were following us all the way. So when the aircraft stopped outside the runway there, I jumped out and got down the fireman there, They were trying to put the fire off the wheels there, the smoke, whatever it was. And they covered me up with, oh, they blind me all over the place. They took me to Patterson Field at the hospital there, they cleaned me up. But in the bomber section, there was a captain, Lieutenant Colonel Jim Philpott. He was a TWA captain on military leave. He was trying to recruit pilots because he knew that, hey, everybody's going to come out. He had talked to me and he said about joining TWA. So anyway, Dick Ball, Gentili, Bob Hoover was there, and the rest of it. I think they too. They came in the hospital to find out what happened. What happened to them? So I told them, you know. And then after they left, you know, Jim Philpott came in and he said, hey, buddy, I got a big 26 and going to Kansas City and I need a co-pilot. I said, Jimmy, I'll come with you. So, thank you. So I went to Kansas City, I joined TWA. I spent about 2.5 years with them. I learned a lot. I flew in Connie as a co-pilot. I never got checked out as a captain. I got some 800 hours. I got the airline transport license. And, but then life as an airline pilot at the time wasn't really happy. We had 3 furloughs and a strike by the captains. And I said, I've done it. You know, my buddy Gentili was at the Pentagon. I called him and said, Dad, I'm going to LaGuardia to Washington National, meet me for coffee. And he met for coffee and I told him my complaints and he said, you want to get back on active duty? What Dad? I said, I don't have 2 years of college. The Air Force wants 2 years of college. In the meantime, you know, the Air Force had just left the Army and became independent. You know, they want 2 years of college. Yeah, I said, but you got something that the Air Force will give $1 million to have you. I said, what do you mean? Jet time. I have over 100 hours, you know, jet time, test time. And at that time, you know, you could really count the jet pilots, you know, the Air Force had in your fingers. My God, he said, I'm going to send you an application, but don't send it through channels, you send it to me. I did that, I completed the goddamn application, with airline transport license, they sent that to jet time so much. And 10 days later, by direction of the President of the United States, you are recalled to active duty, report to the Pentagon. I was happy. I reported to the Pentagon, got a regular commission. And funny, the application for regular commission at the Pentagon, and I got promoted to major there. Then had it called general officers you serve under. And I said, general officers? General Spads had retired as chief of the Air Force and he lived at Georgetown. I really took the liberty and said, I'm going to get permission if I can really get his name on it. So I called up and his wife answered. I said, is the general? No, he's not in. I said, ma'am, I said, this is Captain Pisanos. I said, you know, I'm applying for a regular commission, and the application, I said, had information if I knew of any generals, and I had met General Spatch when he came to our station, you know, and visiting us, listened to our conversation while we were fighting the Luftwaffe. Oh, she said, you know, he'll be here this afternoon. Why don't you come by? I said, thank you, ma'am. So I got the address. I went to the floor shop. I got me a dozen of red roses. I took it to the lady. I walked in, and there was the old general, you know. And I said, General, yeah, I said, I remember you. You're the fellow with the accent, he said. Yeah, he and Doolittle and Keckner and everybody used to come to Depton, to our station, because, hey, we were the most experienced guys, you know, in the Army Air Force. You know, they liked the way Bletchley was giving briefings and, you know, what we were doing. Anyway, oh, he says, by all means, you put my name there. I got the goddamn regular commission. 6 out of the Pentagon were given a regular commission, out of 200 throughout the country. And I was one of them. I got promoted to it. Anyway, I was happy to serve Uncle Sam there. I served in many places. Germany, I served with NATO. I was in Germany for the second time when I volunteered to go to Vietnam. And when I went home to tell my wife I was going to Vietnam, she says, what on earth are you doing? Oh, you got 2 children here. I said, I know, but Uncle Sam, I said, the man who helped me really be what I am is in trouble in Vietnam. And I am a soldier, and I think I have to go there. Thank God. I thought for a moment I was going to really have a goddamn divorce in my hands. But thank God I didn't, and we just passed our 63rd anniversary, and we're on our way to our 64th with the same woman. Anyway, then I went to Vietnam, and actually I volunteered to go in the goddamn F4 unit. And I had orders when I left Wiesbaden to report to Williams Air Force Base. and get checked out on the Air4, and they go over. In Kansas City now on leave, I got a goddamn telegram. Your assignment to Williams has been canceled. You're to report to Seward Air Force Base in Tennessee to get checked out on the C-5. The C-5 is the Caribou. 2-engine, de Havilland built. It was really built by Canada for the Army. And the Army had it for a while, 200 aircraft, but they didn't know how to operate it. And Mr. McNamara decided to give it to the Air Force. Anyway, that's a different thing. I got to Vietnam. I became the operations officer since I was a senior lieutenant colonel. Then later on, I got hold of the gave me command of the squadron, and I completed 375 missions in Vietnam, supporting the special forces. And then I had missions in Laos and Thailand, where we gave ammunition to people, not the military people, but the CIA. They were operating there, and we had to get ammunition. Anyway, I finished up my tour in Vietnam, and I was in Kansas City, and I was supposed to be assigned to Vandenberg Air Force Base, the only position they have for a lieutenant colonel. My wife liked California so much, you know, and so I got a telegram. Your assignment to Vandenberg has been canceled. You have been promoted to colonel, and you are to report to the 308 Ballistic Missiles Wing at Little Rock Air Force Base as Deputy Commander for Maintenance. I knew nothing about the goddamn missiles. Now I learned they sent me to a special school where I had majors, captains, and sergeants teaching me, the only student, teaching me about not the Atlas, the other missile. Anyway, it was very enjoyable assignment. Then from that assignment, after I had really become familiar how to really, don't you know it? SAC and the JCS had a requirement. Once a month, the wing commander with the three deputies and the vice commander would sit down in a locked room, patrolled by military police, and review every target that each one of those 18 silo missiles was assigned to. You probably not remember, but in Little Rock, I think throughout the country, we had some funny guys, you know, they thinking about this and, you know, getting hold of a missile, and they felt that, is it possible that one of our own might say, Moscow, let's go to London, you know, change that. This is the reason that SAC, you know, require that. So the wing commander, we had to review, and I want you to know, I saw with my eyes some of the targets we had. Now, of course, those missiles are out of the inventory. Moscow, Leningrad, Odessa, and the bombs that we carry on those missiles, Titan II missile, by the way, the bombs that we carry on those were not the bombs we drop in Japan. They were hydrogen baggers. One of them will just make the entire city of Moscow, you know, go to town. Anyway, I got a call one day from the Pentagon, from a colonel who was in charge of generals and colonels' assignment. Pisanos, how would you like to go to Athens, Greece, and be the chief of the Air Force mission? I said, who is this? I said, you're pulling my leg. I'm not pulling your leg. He said, you know, but I said, wait a minute, Colonel. I said, the SAC spent big money, I said, to train me. That's okay. He said, you know, but SAC doesn't own you, I own you. Anyway, Arkansas really came back to me. You see, you know, I was really good friends with Arkansas. And I got the assignment there. Diplomatic passport. I went to Washington. I was briefed. Air Force Intelligence, CIA, DIA, not to be a spy, but to have this and this wide open. Because the Russians had about 150 agents in Athens shadowing NATO. They didn't care about the Greek army or the Air Force. They want the Americans and NATO to find out what on earth they have for us. You know, and so I was told, you know, just listen to, because you're going to participate in many, many episodes, you know, that will be important to us. Your contact is the Air Attaché, a colonel by the name of Jim French, who became good friends. I didn't go by name on those conditions. I had a number, 514 was my number. I like to tell you, I had it in the book, you know, and the publisher, he said, you better remove that because the CIA will be in your feet or in your back. What it is, let me tell you right now. Every so often, I had $5,000, by the way, allowances per year to spend entertaining the chief of the Greek Air Force, other military, and what have you, in the diplomatic area. So this time, the Jim French, the attaché, you know, was giving a beautiful garden party. And every Tom, Dick, and Harry from the air attaché business was there. I was wearing my white dress uniform with my collection here. And all of a sudden, the Russian naval attaché, a commander, Colonel Pisano, he said, you are a hero of the American Air Force. He came just by. I was talking to the Italian and the German attachés that moment, the three of us. He said, let me congratulate you. We must get together, Colonel, he said, and have dinner at my home, at your home. Please, you know. Oh, and then he walked away. Oh, the German guy made a funny remark about the loud voice, you know. The following day in my office, who in the heck walked in? The chief of the CIA station chief. Steve, he said, has your office been developed? I said the last week, I said, I have somebody from the embassy there and checked, everything's fine. Okay, who closed the door? He said, I was at Jim French's house, and I saw what the Russian Navy commander did to you. We want you to have a dinner at your house, or even, not his house, but your house. We prefer your house. And see if you can arrange to have the Russian guy to sit down with one of our boys who speaks Russian better than the Russians.
Oh, jeez.
And then, of course, you know, my thoughts went back to Washington. You know, I said, hey, I guess this is something. Anyway, he left, you know, he says, you know, he told me, not being part of the game. So immediately I called up Jim. Jim, I said, are you free? Yeah. I said, how about walking to the park? We had the Royal Gardens in Athens, a garden that they have built for the king, you know, and it's still there today. And every time we had to really talk something, we take a walk in the park without anybody nearby. So I told him, oh, God damn it, he said, we got to go to Washington. He went to Washington. Washington came back and he said, number 514 is not, repeat, is not to be involved. So and so and so and quote. You see, the Russian naval commander, our people had found out from Washington, if they relayed that to the people in Athens, had been passed over for promotion to captain. And he had expressed a desire to leave the service and go to America. Why? He was a nuclear submarine commander. That's why the CIA, you know, wanted to see this guy, wanted to have the guy. So anyway, and then we discussed with Jim. He said, Washington felt this way. Look, you are working, trying to sell the F-4 to the Greek Air Force, you know, and if the Greeks find out that you're not a colonel, you are a CIA guy, goodbye. You know, they're not going to talk to you, and believe me, I was just like that with the chief of the Air Force, who was my boss in Naples when he was a lieutenant colonel and I was a major serving in NATO. And also, you know, the Prime Minister, Spiros, when he came to Athens, we had a big syndic at the Hilton Hotel, and he introduced me, the ambassador introduced me to Spiro, and of course Spiro, you know, said, hey, you were born here and you went to America and look what you did. He said, so, and they introduced me to the Prime Minister, and it was the Prime Minister whom I convinced to buy the F-4s that I was really selected to go to Athens. I sold 2 squadrons of F-4s to the Greek Air Force, $300+ million. And what I did, I told them we have tested the F-4 in Vietnam. The French with their Mirage and the British with their Jaguar have not done that. The F-4 can carry the atomic bombs, but that doesn't mean that America would want you to do it. That's our job. I said, if we have to do something with the Russians. And further, Washington has told me to tell you that we're going to support you for the next 20 years. This was 1972. To this day, they fly the Air Force in office today. I had to brief the Chief of the General Staff, an Army four-star general, in Greek. The guy didn't speak a word of English, but I did depart from Uncle Sam. Let me close here now and say this. After, of course, Athens, you know, we decided with the wife and the children to go on retirement. So I was going back to the States, not by a freighter this time, but see, in a Constellation in the first class, because the station TWA manager and I was a good friend of mine. Every time I flew TWA, he always put me up in the first class. So here I am, going back to my adopted country now, here with a diplomatic passport in my pocket, where I don't have to worry about immigration or anything else. They'll meet me and escort me, you know, to go my way. Anyway, I went on retirement, but I'd like to say this. I am proud of the success I found in America. And I am proud to have become a citizen of this great country. What America did for me, I keep deep in my heart, because there is so much to be proud and grateful for. Uncle Sam gave me the opportunity to become not only an aviator, but beyond that. I never really dared to dream that someday I would be wearing the uniforms of two great air forces, the British Royal Air Force and Uncle Sam's Army Air Force, where I attained the rank of a colonel in the regular Air Force, not in the Reserve Air Force. Proud to have completed 3 prestigious schools. The Air Force's Test Pilot School, where my friend Pat here, John Knapp later on, the Air Command Staff College, and the Air War College. To earn a BS degree from the University of Maryland while attending classes at night while I was at the Pentagon. Collecting a number of commendations, awards, and decorations from Uncle Sam and 4 other countries. Accumulating close to 8,000 hours in some 85, 90 different type aircraft, truck-driven and jet-propelled, including a fighter, the F-106, where I clocked some 1,500 miles an hour. That's twice the speed of sound. To me, that was a great achievement when you consider that I had learned to fly in a J3 car. Yes, I was able to really accomplish all this because of the opportunity given to me by Uncle Sam and the American people when I first came here. And my gratitude to this wonderful country is too great to express to you how I feel in my heart about the United States of America, your country and my adopted country. America, my friends, is the greatest democracy on this planet. A country that believes in freedom, opportunity, equality, and promise. A country worth loving, serving, fighting for, and dying for Uncle Sam and the American flag. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to point out that Colonel Pisanos has some copies of his book, The Flying Greek, up here, if you'd like. I've already got
anybody's interested, my autograph there.
has already got them. And we'd like to give you just something. You probably got more of these. But this is one of your former mounts, a P-40, as photographed by one of our professionals here. We're very proud of this work.
I forgot about it. Truthfully, you know, when I was in OTU and I was flying this in the 51A, I prefer the Mustang because this guy here, you know, you had to really taxi fast and take off. If you had to wait out there for that doggone light would come up, engine's too hot, you had to shut down the engine and wait. That's why, but I like it.
Well, thank you very much.
One question.
Yes, a question?
Yes.
Question. You said you went from the P-40 to the Spitfire. Will you just give me your evaluation of both of those aircraft?
Oh.
Compare them?
Okay. The P-40, as I said, one of the things that I didn't like in ODU, was but yet the boys in the Pacific, did okay. But the Spitfire, was beautiful. You could really defend any city. And if you ask me, okay, we go to defend San Diego's. And you have the Spitfire, the P-40, the P-47, the Hurricane. Which one was the Spitfire? Because it was designed, for that particular purpose. Now, if you said, we have a target in San Francisco, we're going to take the B-17s up there, and we need to escort it. I'll take the 51 with the Rolls-Royce engine. Because the P-51 with the Rolls-Royce engine could operate high altitudes, up to 40,000 feet, low altitudes, can turn as good as the Spitfire, but it had the ability to fly way.
Thank you very much.
My question that I have, it did have the Maryland engine in P-51.
Yeah.
Did you ever fly one of them with engines that they put in it?
The Allison, yeah, he flew the Allison.
Yeah, I flew the Allison.
Early on.
Oh yeah, I flew the Allison. The Allison was good up to, the P-51 with the Allison engine was good up to 10,000. After that, it wasn't really...
That was just a plane.
But you see, the P-51A was designed for the Army Air Force here for low level. But the guys in Washington says, we don't need that. What do you think about the aircraft? The RAF. Because they were dreaming, we need to have an aircraft, that can do better. Any other questions?
No, I'll take one of your books. Yeah. Okay. I want to keep one if we can from the library as well, because Katrina Pescador is going to do it. So we're going to stake one out for Katrina, and then tell them. Yes. We're going to make sure Katrina comes back to buy this from you, and she'll tell you how to sign it.
Okay. Is this your talk today?
And more.
No, is this what you spoke?
Yeah, but the details are here.
Oh.
I cut down details, because,
Luckily, that's all I had my wallet.
Would you give me that chair, please?
You know how to get it.
Oh, sit or something, yeah.
Some people believe my boss
first last night.
now he okay here.
Oh, I should have, Dick Gold took me out on the 38 at right field.
Check you out.
Oh, yeah,
That's
on the
wonderful.
Yeah.
Not many people can say, okay, your copy is here, but you still have to pay for it.
Yeah, and I don't want
There
to.
you are. Okay, I got it.
Now, do you want it signed?
I want it signed.
Did you?
Just no,
Okay.
with the name.
Okay, well then, you'll have to join the happy throng, but I think that's wonderful. I guess right here, I guess.
I guess I could turn off the camera, huh?
At this point. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Did you get it all, Katrina?
I am hoping
I had to report to the head of the Office of Space Sciences.
Who was
And
that?
I had
Is
to
that George Mueller?
No, Space Sciences was a gentleman named John Noggle,
Okay.
Dr. John Noggle. And the head of the Apollo program at that time was Rocco Patroon. So each of them had a staff meeting every week. So I had to attend both staff meetings and try to, if there was any difference of opinion between my two bosses, I would occasionally have to mitigate it. Anyhow, interesting.
Well, let's take you back to that time period. I mean, in the 65 to 67 time period, when you were basically director of Apollo Lunar Exploration Office, you saw the early Apollo tests coming along. Did you think at any point between that some of the mission decisions were too rough? I mean, here we were. We had just had the Apollo fire, and we lost Grissom, White, and Chaffee. And they're saying the second manned mission out, we're going to go to the moon, Apollo 8 around the moon. Did you think that was, how did you find out about that? How did you react to that?
I found out on a golf course.
Oh, really? Done a lot of
Sunday
that.
morning, maybe it was a Saturday, I was playing golf, and I was about halfway through the round, and pro came out. One of the pros came out and said, "Which one of you is Sheriff?" And I raised my hand. And he says, "You're to call home immediately. Bring your golf bag." So I jumped in the cart and we went back to the pro shop, me thinking one of my kids has been run over or the house is on fire. And I got back and called my wife, and she says, "You've been told to report to NASA headquarters at 11 o'clock. And it was then about 10:30.
Oh boy.
And I rushed to NASA headquarters.
Do you remember what month this was too? How late it was in the Apollo planning? Was it August or was it earlier than that? Or
Seemed like it was in the summertime.
it was in the summer? Okay.
And I went back, and the head of Apollo at that time was General Sam Phillips, who later became a 4-star general. He's 3 stars at that time. A wonderful guy. And if you want to name some I've been asked, name 3 people most responsible for man's first landing on the moon, and I said George Low, who picked up the Apollo program at Houston after the fire, and Werner von Braun, the father of all launch vehicles, and Sam Phillips, NASA headquarters. Sam called, we were 3 or 4 of us were lieutenants to him, and he said, "Gentlemen, we're going to take Apollo 8 to the moon." And we were open-mouthed. He says, "President Johnson has just made that decision." No, was it John?
Yeah, it was Johnson.
Well, I'm not sure. The president has just made a decision this morning that we will take Apollo 8 to the moon. We ask questions like, "We don't even have a landing vehicle to go to the moon." And he says, "I know. Man has never flown on a Saturn V." He says, "I know. And are you serious?"
Yeah.
And he said yes. So NASA then made this hardest decision, I suppose, technically, in their history. They decided to take the first launch of Saturn V with a person in it and take it to the moon. And Apollo 8 did that. And the 3 astronauts orbited the moon. And on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, they broadcast back from the moon and read from the Bible. Those 3 were, let me see,
Frank Borman.
Borman was the commander, West Pointer. Number 2 was Bill Anders. And number 3 was Blank.
No, it was Captain Lovell.
Oh, Christ. Yes, it was. And it was Captain Lovell. Well, Lovell now runs his own company called consultant firm. Borman became head of Eastern Airlines, and Anders was a Naval Academy man who became CEO of General Dynamics. So they went far. That trio.
You've done an incredible job. I think Bill Anders is retired down in this area, and Jim. From what I understand, Jim Lovell sponsored his youngest son, to get a restaurant in Chicago called Lovell's. So
Lovell's.
Yeah, just Lovell's.
Anders is now retired and lives in San Juan Islands and has
really?
a spot here in San Diego.
Wow.
And he
Thanks.
owns, last count I had, 12 airplanes.
Wow.
But he's a brilliant man in many respects. But what he's done with these 12 he started a museum in Washington State, and keeps his 12 airplanes there. Then he opens it up to the public. So since he does that, it's a tax write-off for him, and he gets to fly any of the airplanes he wishes, and he does things like flying at Reno and other places. And so it pays for his upkeep. Security is covered.
Yeah.
And he's got his airplanes safely in the hangars. Smart.
Very smart. Very, very smart.
Yes.
Well, let me take you back one more section because I'm curious. Where were you, and what were you doing during the period that you heard about the Apollo AS-204 fire, the Apollo 1 fire?
I had come back to NASA running the Lunar Orbiter program, right. And I remember parking my car, listening to the radio, and they announced the fire. Bad day.
Yeah. Well, let's move forward. I mean, a lot of decisions I'm sure were changed at that point, but let's move back. We've successfully had Apollo 8, and Richard Nixon has stepped in as president now, and we've done the Apollo 9 test, the Apollo 9 capsule being here at the San Diego Air and Space Museum. Did you feel that we were rushing it? Immediately the next flight was going to be 10, and we were going to take the gumdropping spider, in this case it would be Snoopy and Charlie Brown, down to nearly the surface. Were we rushing at that point? Did you feel that we were doing well?
Planned, we all had planned a step-by-step. And initially, as I recall, the step-by-step program would have Apollo 12 landing on the moon, Pete Conrad. But the Apollo 8 leapfrogged some of the steps, and if I back up a minute, when Apollo 8 went to the moon, the Russians never again tried to send man to the moon. We had won that race, if you want to call it that. So Apollo 9, Jim McDivitt and Dave Scott had to test the landing craft, deploying it and so on.
Along with Rusty Schweikert.
And that's a spacecraft that's down here at the Spiros Space Museum. And then Apollo 10, Tom Stafford and Gene Cernan went up, orbited the moon, and then this, was sent down close to the moon's surface. But that step was to determine flying qualities of the landing craft. And then they came back up and rendezvoused again. So that was a necessary, I believe, the necessary step. And between 8 and 9 and 10, with 11, then we said it was decided that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin would land, which happened.
Now, back to some of the critical decisions of 11. Where were you in the flow chart for 11? Did you have anything to say about landing sites or crew selection or missions?
Nothing to do with crew selection. Landing site was Houston decision. What's the safest place we could find? Nothing to do with science or anything. I was under my aegis was the experiments, and Apollo 11 didn't do a whole lot except walk around and pick up material, which came back, was brought back, and then deposited in what was called the Lunar Receiving Laboratory at Houston. where it's still being studied by a variety of scientists who are trying to determine the origin of the moon, and there are two schools. One was captured as it went by, and the other is it was a piece of the Earth that broke off. Last I've heard, they still haven't decided that.
Mm-hmm. So on 11, you were the director of Apollo Lunar Exploration Office at that point. You basically decided that I think it was Site 2 was going to be the safest there in the Sea of Tranquility. From what I understand, though, they landed 5 miles down range. So was there any nervousness in your office that possibly they had landed somewhere that we had to try to figure out where they were going to come back to at that point in the rendezvous and docking procedure?
No, we never had any intention of going back to the same landing site. But it was really exciting in that they were running out of fuel. Mm-hmm. And so we were watching that very strongly. I was an observer down in Houston, really sweating that, and suddenly the computer indicated false readings, mm-hmm. And a young man in the back room said, "I've seen that before. Continue."
That was Bales, right?
Yeah. So they continued, and they landed. Neil found a spot that he thought was safe, and it was. And he landed so gently that it did not compress the landing struts. It was so gentle. So as he came down the ladder later, he got to the last step, and it was about 3 feet, and so he had to jump. He held onto the rail, but he came down on the landing pad, and that's where he stood when he said, he put his boot out, stomped on the surface, leaned over, he had a camera right here, leaned over and took a picture of it. Mm. And I have that picture hanging on my wall with a nice citation from Neil. My pride.
Well, that's 11 was successful. When they brought the samples back to Houston, they actually got the samples ahead of C-141 and landed in Houston beforehand. Were you at the lab when they cracked open the?
No, that was all being done by. They were put in quarantine. Mm-hmm. Put in a special trailer. I mean, and it was decided they would be quarantined for 30 days. Mm-hmm. I was asked one time by a reporter, "Why 30 days?" And my answer was, "That's how long you do it when you don't know what you're doing it for." There were a lot of people saying we're bringing back some germs from the moon. And President Nixon went down and talked to the astronauts through a window in the trailer.
On the USS Hornet, right?
Congratulating them. So that was a big day.
Well, 11 is successful, and you're coming up to decisions about 12. And who was it that suggested, well, let's go back to the Surveyor 3 site in the Ocean of Storms?
I don't know whether I originated, but I suggested that. And others may have suggested at the same time, but I had been manager of the Surveyor. At one stage, I was moved from the lunar program to, I was made head of all lunar programs. There were only two.
Yeah. Surveyor
and so the Surveyor had landed in 1966, I believe. Mm-hmm. And so it'd been on the moon for 4 years or some time. And I suggested in the meeting, let's land by surveyor, and we can inspect it and bring back pieces of it and determine the flux of micrometeorites on the moon. So that idea was accepted, and as I say, I'm not sure I was the only one who thought of it. So Pete Conrad landed close to it, and he walked over, and he first, as he came down the ladder, he had to jump, and Pete's a short fella, about 5'7", I guess, and he jumped, and his first remarks was, "It might have been a small step for Neil, but it's a hell of a jump for me." He went over to the surveyor, cut off the camera, and brought it home, and experts studied the marks on the camera to determine the momentum of the energy of the micrometeorites, and determined that the question was, can our suits, if the suits have punctured them, the astronauts on the surface would be dead. So they determined from that test that the suits were strong enough, and we proceeded.
That's awesome. I think we'll hold up at this point because it's been about 2 minutes short of that hour, and we'll take a break here. And
I got up and I tried to stop on the wing, but my dinky cord, the dinky cord that you connect to the main west, I have forgotten to connect that when we left. We were in a hurry. One of the great mistakes a fighter pilot can make. So when we were tumbling over Bordeaux, evidently that thing got, the plug got stuck somewhere below my seat there, in something like this, So as I stood up, I said, the plug. I tried to pull the plug, nothing coming up. I tried to pull it. In the meantime, the perspiration and the fear was all over me. Sit down. I sat down back there, and I played left or right, and finally I disconnected the goddamn thing from wherever it was trapped. I connected it to my main west. Too late now. I wasn't going to be over the channel. But anyway, I connected to the main west. I got up again, and the wind was blowing me back. I stepped out on the right-hand side, and what I had in mind, I had never done that before. Put the right hand by the D-ring and count up to 10, and pull the thing and wait for whatever's going to happen. Thank God that I looked up there and I can see cattle, cows all over the goddamn countryside, farmland where I was coming down. Had I really left the aircraft, the parachute would have never opened, or it would have opened exactly at the moment I stopped the ground. So I stood right there, I thought of trying to get back in the cockpit, and with my parachute on, I thought I would destroy the stick there, So the aircraft was coming just straight down, and we just missed the roof of the only barn in that farmland area. And Dan Blexley, as we crossed the French coast, he said, "Guys, I gotta go back. My engine is acting funny." So anyway, I was coming up over the hull, and that thing just, wait a minute, bang. After I had experienced, backfiring and this, and it appeared that at that time, out of the 12 cylinders, maybe 6 cylinders were operating, or 4, or 5, or 6. But it was coughing and moaning and yawning. So just as I was coming over the hull, the goddamn flak, was the heaviest I have ever seen. My engine quit, I gave Mayday, and then after my 3rd or 4th Mayday, my radio quit. I crash landed. I decided not to really try to make to the English Channel, because if I had bailed out, the wind, they had north wind at that time, by the way, the wind would have brought me over the harbor, and the guys would have practiced on me. And it was the period where the Germans were shooting anybody coming down in a parachute. B-17 boys, you should have seen it, coming down in a parachute, and the goddamn Luftwaffe guys, just strafing the hell out of them. Anyway, that in mind, I was kind of scared and so on, so I decided to go southbound. Now, the crash landing is a little complicated. I describe it in the book very, very nicely, and I'm not going to go through here because I don't want to take the time. Anyway, I crash landed there, and I was standing on the wing when I crash landed. because what I had attempted to do was to bail out at 2,000 feet, not high altitude. Now I had an aircraft without an engine, remember? I trimmed the aircraft nicely, I blew up the canopy, I tried. Jean-Claude Boyer was my name, a mechanician, a mechanic. That during the war I was with the heavy artillery and I had lost my hearing. So if anybody asks something, you know, I'd say, what? What you say? What? Qu'est-ce que c'est? You know, things like that. Anyway, I didn't know it. But while we were driving on the highway to Paris, my friend, the gendarme who spoke some English, he said, Stéphane, là-bas, beaucoup mitraillettes, machine guns, underneath the goddamn firewood. If you remember, the RAF, later on we were going to do the same thing, made airdrops to the underground, at different places at night, to the OSS guys, to different people. Now, how do you take those weapons to the underground in Paris? You can't just walk with them. That was one of the methods. So when he told me that underneath that firewood was mitraillette, I wanted to say, stop the car, I'm moving out. Anyway, I lived with 16 different families in Paris. The last family, there were 3 guys. The biggest saboteurs the underground had. And I don't know if you gentlemen remember, General Eisenhower said in his book, if it wasn't for the French underground, the invasion in Normandy could have had a different face. They were good, I mean, saboteurs. I took part with them. As I passed the fire, in fact, you know, I reached inside and I pulled the stick back a little bit to miss that roof there. But by doing that, I probably killed whatever speed I had, because on the other side of the barn, the right wing came down, struck the ground, and I was thrown between the stack propeller in the air and landed somewhere there. How long I stood there, I have no idea. 2 German soldiers came in later on while I was preparing to put fire on the aircraft. They fired at me and they scared me. I dropped everything and I began to run into the forest. I got into the forest and that's where I lost it. For 5 days, I wandered all over the countryside. I drank water from running creeks. I ate grass, and thank God, I was grown up in dandelions. My mother used to make dandelion salads, and I found those goddamn wild dandelions. I picked them up, put them in my back pocket, and I washed them, you know, as I was going through the running creeks. The underground picked me up 5 days later. I had a problem with them now. This guy, a lieutenant colonel of the French Secret Service, but underground man. Stéphane, you parle anglais, not like American. He said, well, so I told him, I said, I was not born in America. I said, I was born in Athens, and I went to America when I was 18. So he wanted to know more than about rank, serial number, and date of birth, and so on. He asked for my father's name, and this and that and that. That's how they were really operated. Why? Because before the war, German families with youngsters went to Germany to visit the grandparents. What do you think Hitler did when or the Gestapo when the war started? You think they left those American boys to come home? They used them. In fact, they had a captured B-17, I was told, by the underground, flying, and the guys jumping out with American uniforms, dog tags, impersonating to be American crews, so they can penetrate the underground. Who on earth is helping 10 people from a crashed B-17? We cannot find the bodies, and we cannot find them. Where are they? Where are they going? Who is helping them? This is what they were using. Anyway, so I gave all this information to this guy, you know, about my father's name was Nicholas, my roommate's name was Gentili, the aircraft that I crashed with, Markins QPD, and about a couple of days later, he came into the room with a goddamn bottle of Bordeaux wine. Stéphane, we talked to London. Here a soir, yesterday evening. Talked to London. We know who you are, the Flying Greek. You know, in squadron, they always called me the Greek. They never really used my call sign. Greek, watch this. Greek, watch that. Greek, let's go get these guys. You know. Anyway, so I was one in the family. I spent 6 months in occupied France. They, about 10 days or so later, they moved me to Paris. You know why they moved me to Paris? In a truck loaded with firewood. The driver and another guy here, a gendarme in civilian clothes, and I was in the middle. If I could give him fake papers,